Well, I am very excited because today we have the absolute privilege of hearing from the author of Truest, Jackie Lee Sommers. So,
Hello.
hello. Thank you so much for taking time to chat with us today about your creativity, your book writing, and your persevering life. It's very fun.
Thank
So,
you. I'm so excited.
awesome. So we're going to get into your book in a moment, but let's do some quick fire questions so we can like really get to know you a little bit.
Sounds good.
So first of all, who is in your life that like contributes to your writingness of today?
Yeah, totally. So I have a couple former writing group friends that we used to meet every month, and now we don't meet as regularly, but there's still people that I reach out to for encouragement as well as critiques and all of that kind of thing. So I still kind of consider them my writing group girls.
And what are you listening to? Do you have like certain podcasts or like nature sounds that help you?
Yeah. Well, so I usually don't write while listening to anything. I find myself getting distracted pretty easily. So I sometimes will just listen to like soundtrack music or nothing. But I do love right now, I've been really into the maintenance phase podcast. So that's something I've been following.
What's that about?
It is about the myths of diet culture. It's not related to writing.
Interesting. Awesome. I'll have to check that out. Well, what are you reading as an author? I know that you enjoy reading.
Yes. So my goal this year has been to try to read something fiction, something nonfiction, something poetry, and something craft every month. So I just finished reading a book by Aubrey Gordon, who is one of the hosts of that Maintenance Phase podcast, which was my nonfiction book. And I also oh gosh, what did I just finish reading? I listened to it on audio. I'm also listening to um, uh, I'm reading a book called Active Setting,
Okay.
which is about essentially like making sure that every choice that you make when you're writing about setting or scenery or any kind of like writing of place is supposed to be there and pushing things forward so that it actually is doing double duty. You're not just describing and the walls were blue. Like it needs to be moving the narrative forward. So that's actually been really interesting to read that, because I would not say that setting is my strength. So I really kind of wanted to focus in on that with my craft area. I've also got on my radar some of the big prize winners of middle grade fiction. So fiction written for 8 to 12-year-olds, because I have this sort of goal that I want to write a middle grade book, but I don't feel like I've earned it. I feel like I need to really read some of the best middle grade books before I dive too deep into it. So I have an idea and kind of characters and an outline of what I want to happen, but I think I need to really educate myself more and learn from some of the middle grade masters before I go too deep into that. But that is a project that's on my radar. So reading a bunch of middle grade books is on my radar. I write mostly young adult, but I'm interested in this. I'm not very good at fast questions.
That's okay. I'm like, oh, this is great. I'm writing down all of this. That's awesome. I'd love to hear more about future projects in a little bit because that sounds very exciting. That yeah, I'm excited for you that you're branching out to a little bit younger characters. So that's very neat.
Yeah, thanks.
So, what are you eating? So, I think eating, the reason I ask this random question is I think that we can get stuck in ruts and have like weird relationships with food. And so, I just think that having a healthy relationship with food actually helps us as creative people. So,
I
what are
think
you
that that's
eating,
very
Jackie?
true. I would not say that I am like a beacon of great healthy habits with that. I've been eating a lot of avocado toast, but also have been eating a lot of chocolate.
Those both sound really good.
True.
Awesome. And then what are you creating outside of writing? What are you creating?
Oh, outside of writing. Um, okay, so this is gonna sound like really like big and maybe cheesy and existential, but what I'm really trying to create is a life that I feel is really meaningful and that I'm really proud of. Um, I read this really cool article years ago on Thought Catalog, and it was an article about self-care and how self-care has come to essentially mean like bubble baths. Like in today's society, like if it's like, oh, I need a self-care night, it means like ordering Chipotle and like lighting some candles and maybe getting like a foot massage, right? But how this article said the reality of self-care is building a life for yourself that you don't feel the need to escape from.
Hmm.
And that was really impactful for me. And so obviously there's a lot of places in life that we are going to have to do things that we don't want to do. But when we do have the ability to make some of those changes, how can I create a life that I don't feel like I have to escape with bubble baths and a manicure?
Mhm.
So that's kind of what I'm building. Like, and I last year, so in 2021, I always pick a word of the year, and my word last year was rebuild. So I really do feel like that is kind of what I'm trying to make in my life right now.
That's awesome. I love that concept. And that's not cheesy at all. I think that's really important. And
Yeah.
yeah, there's so much more to being who you are than the outside bits of taking care.
I've
So
also
I
been
love that.
trying to dabble in types of art that I'm probably never going to be great at. Um, so like I bought like an embroidery kit and I
Mhm.
did some embroidery, and then I bought stuff to do some like textile art, like fiber art, weaving. Um, and I'd really love to do upholstery, but I don't know that I'm strong enough for it because you
Sure.
it's you're like wrestling with fabric and a chair and like an electric like staple gun. And so, but I've been watching some YouTube videos about it and stuff. So things where I, I I'm a recovering perfectionist.
Mm.
Um, and I think that it actually is really helpful for me to engage in art that I cannot be perfect at. I'm never going to be known for my fiber arts,
Yeah.
and that's okay. I want to be known as a writer,
Mhm.
but I think that it's actually a really healthy practice for me to try other kinds of art and do okay at them. Even if I'm not going to plug in that kind of effort and energy that I would into my writing career, it allows me to kind of experience different things.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. And how many great character development sketches are you going to be doing based on your wrestling with the chairs you're upholstering?
Right.
That's amazing.
Right. Yeah,
Awesome.
it's always fun to get to think, well, one of my characters can do these things, and they
Mhm.
could be good or bad at it.
Right.
So, mhm.
That's so fun. Cool. Well, thanks for sharing some insights into your life beyond being an author. That's so fun. So let's talk about Truest.
Yeah.
How do you describe this beautiful covered book? How do you describe this to folks who aren't familiar with your work?
Yeah, so I tell them it's contemporary realistic fiction because there's so much right now. I think that like fantasy and sci-fi are really kind of the rage right now. So I'm like, there's not that kind of magic
Mhm.
in my book, although I think that all words like have magic. So that's not, but not that kind of magic. Um, it is about a disillusioned teenage daughter of a pastor who is starting off in what she thinks is going to be the worst summer of her life. And then she meets these two kind of mysterious twins, a very, very handsome, smart boy and a very odd, mysterious twin sister that she's not really sure what's going on with. And it's kind of about it's a coming of age taking place the summer before her senior year of high school.
Yeah, wonderful. That's a great way to describe it. I really like that that coming of age moment. That's such a crucial year
Yeah.
to figure out the rest of your life.
Or at least the start of the rest of your
Yeah.
life, right?
Yeah, yeah, awesome. Well, what was it that actually drew you to publish a book? Because that's a big undertaking.
I have almost always wanted to write and publish books since I was quite young. I remember writing my first fiction in about second grade, I think, second or third grade. Um, and and prior to that, when I was very, very young and I didn't know how to write yet, I didn't know all my letters, I would tape pieces of paper across the kitchen floor and then I would draw pictures. So I was kind of telling stories, but in a different format before I learned my alphabet, essentially, or how to string things together in the right way. So I've always been interested in storytelling. And then when I got a little older, um, storytelling for me kind of came with this goal of like, could I actually publish? Could I publish a book? And so I studied creative writing in college, although I focused a little bit more on poetry when I was in college. But after college, I took a little break because I was very, very tired after college. And then I wrote a book for adults that took me about 4 years to write. And I did not get an agent for it. And I set it aside and started working on another book, which would end up being Truest. And this time I was like, I want to write for teenagers. Like, I love reading young adult books. I think that young adults it's such an interesting, amazing, difficult, and weird time of life when so many changes are happening and you're starting to even like realize, like, who am I? What do I want to do? What are my values? And so I thought, well, let me try writing for teens instead. And then almost immediately I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to write for kids and teens. So I'm not sure that I'm like I had told you, I'm interested in potentially writing a middle grade book, but I'm not sure that I would be interested in writing fiction for adults. I
Hmm.
I do have a potential project that would probably be read by adults, but it would be more of a nonfiction.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Could you tell us a little bit more about your background? Because I know that you write books and I know that you speak at writing conferences.
where we
But
met.
where we met, yeah. But what is it? Yeah, what else is feeding into your background, or from your background, what feeds into your book writing process?
I just love story, and I always have loved story, like from when I was very, very young, just really loving fiction, especially fiction. And when I was young, the neighbor girl had kissing books, like i.e. books with kissing in it. And we didn't really have those in our house. So my sister and I and the neighbor girl would play library, and that's how I got to read all of the kissing books. So that was fun. I mean, but it is very like insightful, I think, to realize, oh, these kids played library. Like I mean, we loved to read. And then actually the three of us later um, formed a club that was very short-lived called the Story Society, where we were supposed to write and submit a story for critique every week. I mean, this is like generate content, right? And I think it lasted like 2 weeks.
How old were you?
This I was probably in like 5th or 6th grade by that point.
Very
So
serious
I
time.
took this very seriously. My sister and the neighbor girl, I felt like weren't taking it as seriously as they needed to. And so, I had these like high expectations. And also, I just have to say, my story was very dramatic. My first story was like a best friend killing the best friend and the boyfriend, but like one jumped in front of the other and like an arrow, like a bow and arrow, like pierced both their hearts. Like it was this is like a 5th grader being like, oh, this is good. This is really good.
That's gold right there, Jackie.
Yeah,
You need to get that out.
seriously.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I think I just always really loved story, and I've always loved words, and I feel like I really got exposed more to poetry in high school and in college, and how poetry improves prose, like how the books, a lot of the books that I am very drawn to have really beautiful writing. It's not necessarily just a great plot or great characters, although those are also great things, but like at a sentence structure, is this writing like beautiful? Does it feel literary and lyrical to me? And so I think that having some background in poetry really influenced that for me. And then went to college and graduated from college. And then a girl who was still one of my friends and who's been a writing critique partner, she got a book published. And it was like, yeah, like maybe I could do that. Like I went to school with this girl, and first of all, she's brilliant. And you know how everyone writes bad first drafts? Everyone but her. Her first drafts are good too. Like, so it is kind of funny that I could look at this like incredible writer and be like, hi, maybe I can do that. But it did give me kind of that like, that map, that sort of like trail, like, oh, okay, so you do this, and then you develop an online presence, and then you query, and then you get an agent, and then the agent gets like, so she was ahead of me on that journey. And so it really kind of felt like I was following her breadcrumbs, even though she was writing memoir and I was writing fiction. There was still, enough that I wanted those breadcrumbs. Yeah. And so, was able to get an agent, and my agent was able to get me a book deal. And that's kind of where we're caught up to a little bit.
Yeah. So this is a long process that you've undergone. Writing a book takes perseverance, right? So you've developed a presence online, you've sent query letters, you've got an agent, you got this wonderful book Truest published, but like this whole getting the book out, that's one thing, right? But then actually like pushing it into publication and allowing people to read it, that's a whole nother practice and perseverance. Like, how have you managed to keep going to finish, and how are you persevering like in this current stage?
So if I can, I want to actually rewind, because when I think about the perseverance of writing Truest, I actually think about that first book that has a manuscript sitting in my bottom drawer, right? That I spent 4 years on, because when that wasn't going to get published, I started writing a new one. And instead of thinking, I guess I'm not good enough for this, or I guess I am not meant for this, I I tried to view it more of, okay, that was a great exercise. Now I get to try a new thing. And the new thing actually did get published. And the more that I have, the more that I've interacted with published writers, the more important perseverance, it becomes very clear, like how important perseverance is. Because I think that I know people who are very, very talented writers who write sentences that I'm very envious of, but who maybe are stopped by perfectionism from finishing a book. And you can't publish a book that's not finished. Whereas, so in a lot of ways, I would say talent is important, but not as important as perseverance, because I know a lot of talented people who can't finish a book, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah. So anyway, so that's, I just wanted to back up and say that when
Yeah.
I think about, I spent about a year and a half writing Truest and writing and revising it, which actually that's not that long. And then a few months querying, and then another year of revisions with my editor at the publishing house, and then another 9-ish months of working with PR and marketing, and they were getting the book cover done and doing final like line drafts and stuff. So even though I began writing Truest in January 2012, it came out in September 2015.
Okay.
But that to me is not the full length of it. But I also spent 4 years on another book. And I also spent college honing my skills. And I also spent all of this time like dedicated to reading the best like stuff that I could get my hands on.
Yeah.
So it's really not just like, oh, it took a year and a half to write and then, whatever to get published. It's like, there's a lot more that goes into it.
So I'm really intrigued because you said earlier that you're a recovering perfectionist.
Yes.
And yet, as a recovering perfectionist, you have managed to set down what maybe would be a hurdle for some writers, like, oh, this first book wasn't good, it wasn't perfect, just my career's over. Like, so what's different about you that you were able to be resilient and just keep going?
I don't know, but I do feel called to write. And I think for me, I have a relationship with Jesus Christ, and I feel like we wrote Truest together. He had the best ideas. And then I think that there's this sense of calling that feels bigger than that, like if I feel really called to write and to create, that calling doesn't end when the first book doesn't get published. Like, or for me, it didn't, at least, I think that it's possible that someone could be called to, experience a short-term thing of, do this, I'm calling you to do this project, even if it doesn't go anywhere. But I think for me, the calling did not cease after something was not successful. And so there was this like, okay, well then onward we go. And that makes it sound a little bit trite and easy, and it has not been easy at all. It's been really, really difficult. In fact, this week has been really hard, and I talked to one of my friends, I think last night, and I said, I feel like this story that I want to write, like I don't have any time. I'm so tired from work. I feel like I go to work and then I come home and just recover enough to go to work again, my day job, not writing. And I said, so I feel like, when am I going to write? When am I going to whatever? And she said, you'll figure it out. And her answer was not flippant. It literally reminded me, I have been working this whole time and I have 4 completed manuscripts. The one that didn't get published, Truest, one that's on submission from my agent with publishers right now, one that I kind of have on the, like, I don't want to say back burner, side burner, and then one that I have just begun. So it's like, somehow I was able to finish these things that I was also, working then. And so I actually kind of liked her response, where she was like, you'll figure it out. This has been a crazy season, and not every season is this crazy. So you'll get back into it, and that kind of thing. So yeah, so I don't know what it is that keeps someone going, but I will say, Ann Patchett, who's a brilliant writer, has a book called This is something like This is What a Happy Marriage Looks Like, or something. I'll literally look it up. And it's actually a bunch of her nonfiction that she's written. This is the story of a happy marriage. But one of the essays in there is about writing. It's more meta. It's about like the writing process and stuff. And she talks about, there's some beautiful writing in it. Like, it made me bawl while I read it. But she said, I almost wish I could just read it to you, but the paraphrased Jackie version is, when I have an idea, the idea is perfect. It's like a perfect, beautiful butterfly, and the beautiful butterfly flies around, and I love it, and it's just gorgeous, and no one can compete with it. And then when I start to write that idea down, I kill the butterfly and I pin it down, and now it is dead. And she's like, and that is sort of sometimes what writing feels like. But an idea is not a book. It feels perfect, but you cannot share it in book form. So even if your idea has to be killed or made imperfect for you to get it onto a page, that is how you can actually share it in book form. And so I think that was really impactful for me. Like, yes, you could have all of these like beautiful and actually perfect ideas for books and plots and characters in your head, but that's actually, if you want to be a writer and you want to publish, that's actually not worth as much as an imperfect thought on paper.
That's really freeing. I love that. And I think one of the things that's standing out for me in what you're saying with this and what I know of you is that books actually create connections between like your ideas and then your readers.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I would say that's so true. And the perfect butterfly in your head, you can't share. I mean, you could talk about it, but it's not a book that you can share with someone else. And so getting it down onto paper, even when it's going to be imperfect, you have to do that if you want to write books.
That's great. Another thing that I really admire about you is you share really openly about your struggles with mental health in your own life. And I just think this honesty is just such a beautiful gift for your readers and those who follow you online. And it's a real way that people can connect with you and resonate and be drawn in to,
I hope so,
to read your books. And so, like, how have you learned to, I don't know if I'm going to use the right words, but just overcome that mental darkness that you've dealt with on a regular
Yeah.
basis in order
Yeah.
to persevere and still follow that calling and be the author that you're created to be.
So I have obsessive compulsive disorder, which is very misunderstood. Everyone probably listening to this just suddenly pictured me as a neat freak, and that is not correct. For me, a lot of my OCD, well, OCD at its core is an intense discomfort with uncertainty. So that was very interesting to watch everyone's reaction during the pandemic and when there was all this uncertainty, and to be like, multiply that by 1,000 for 30 years straight. Like, you have a better idea of like what someone with OCD deals with. I think so. One of the ways that it really showed itself through me was this perfectionism, was this very black and white thinking, very like, this has to be perfect. And so I think when I went through some really intense treatment for obsessive compulsive disorder, which actually lined kind of up with as I was writing that first unpublished novel, I actually went through this treatment during the writing of that, but prior to the writing of Truest. So I think that there was sort of this, I learned skills in accepting things to be incomplete or uncertain. If you are going to write a manuscript of any kind of length, so I mean, usually a young adult novel is around 65 to 80,000 words. An adult novel might be 80 to 100,000 words. If that, you're going to have potentially years of a project being incomplete, right? And so there's this discomfort with a lot of artists. I mean, for sure, I feel this, that, right now I have 7,000 words of my next story, but I need to have about 10 times that much. And that's going to take a long time to do, which means that over the course of the next, year, I'm going to go to bed every night with something uncertain and incomplete. And if you cannot handle that, you're going to be miserable. And like, I'm not saying that I'm great at handling it. I'm saying that I'm learning better how to handle it, because I mean, Anne Lamott, who is just this incredible writer, it's not the exact same thing, but she said, if you are only going to be happy when you publish, you will be happy for about 1 day every 3 years. She said, so you have to learn to enjoy the process, right? You have to be happy writing to have this like happy life. It's just, it doesn't feel, it doesn't feel fulfilling to be happy only when you publish. So I think that there's a similar concept in that of, can I find peace and enjoyment in this process of uncertainty? Because if I can't, like, how can I write a novel length story?
Yeah.
And again, not the expert in this, but definitely something that I am continuing to learn and to try to figure out, when you have a mental illness that causes intense, terror is not an extreme of a word for this, causes intense terror with uncertainty, and you're a novelist, how can that exist together? So thankfully I had some treatment for this, and then writing a novel is ongoing treatment, right? In like, how do we keep moving forward toward goals in an uncertain world where you cannot accomplish that goal by the end of the day?
Yeah,
That was a
that's
lot.
really, no, I love that. I think that's really beautiful. And you said about that even the process of writing is part of that learning and healing and growing that's going to it's like a cycle. It seems like you're willing to commit because you want to be healed of in whole in whatever that looks like, but you also have this deep calling. So they kind of, as you're answering your calling by writing, you're also getting better at being okay with the process, and that's helping you. They're both helping.
Yeah, I mean, in that sense, writing a novel is it's using elements of the therapy that treats OCD.
Mhm.
Because it's exposing yourself to, that's a really weird way to put it. Not exposing yourself. It's exposure therapy to things that are imperfect, incomplete, uncertain, and learning to um, be able to accommodate that. And to be clear, people with OCD do not really have the capacity to accommodate that. The therapy is what exposure therapy literally changes and physically changes the brain and the wiring to allow room to accommodate for that.
Okay.
So I want to be very clear that I'm not saying, listen, people who can't handle uncertainty, you just got to figure out how to accommodate it. Like, it may literally be that there is a glitch in the brain, a brain disorder, where something needs to be adjusted so that you can accommodate that.
That's great. Thank you for clarifying that. I think, yeah, your willingness to share, like I said, is a real gift, but then it's also like such an insight in how you share online, but also even like through your writing. So let's talk about your novel Truest, because you deal with really emotionally heavy issues in late teenage years, and there are some mental health issues that are coming up, and just trauma. And so like how have you found to balance like Silas and Westland's relationship, all the teenage questioning, life uncertainties, we're talking about uncertainty, death, faith, friendships, without like coming across as like a lecture or like here's how to deal with people in this situation, which is not very kind. Like there's a lot going on. How have you how have you then, with what you've just shared about that uncertainty struggle, like how does that work, and how does that work so beautifully in this novel?
That's a great question, and thank you for saying that it works beautifully. I don't know. I think that when we let characters be themselves and learn and grow, sometimes through the things that we're learning and growing in, or that we have learned or have experienced growth in, we're just letting them do their thing versus being an outside presence who is preaching or instructing. You have to let your characters make mistakes too, right? Like they to have a story, you have to have a conflict. So you have to let them go through hard things, and also process them as the character would process them, which is maybe not the way that you would. They may or may not get to the same conclusion that you do. I think that often they do, because we do have that author influence on that, and there's a lot of us in our characters, or at least me and mine. But yeah, you don't want your authorial presence to be so present that it seems like there's this like outside coach. You know, you're letting these characters be complex and make mistakes and attempt to fix things, and sometimes do it in ways that make things worse. Um, there's things that some writers don't or readers don't like in my story. But I always kind of feel like that was what West and Silas, that was their reaction. That's how they handled it. And also, I'm an adult writing about teenagers, right? But they're still teenagers, so they can't necessarily think about everything the way that I do. You know, teenagers jump to conclusions faster than some adults. So some of us, right? But like in general, I think teens and really anyone, you know, under 25, like, and this is scientific, like 25 is when your brain is like fully developed. So prior to that, I think there's some, you know, decision making that you would do at 18 that at 30 you would be like, no, like pause. But when you're like 17 or 18, you would be like, this is absolutely what needs to happen. And so I think letting your characters be 17 or whatever age they are and letting them make those mistakes that maybe you, as I'm 40, you know, I'm not going to make the same mistakes. I mean, some, but hopefully not all the same mistakes that like a 16-year-old would make, but I have to let them do that. Did that answer your question at all?
Yeah, I think that's really good. And it leads into kind of a next thought about really the process of when you knew that your book was ready. Like, so you let your characters be themselves, and
Yeah.
that means that in your case, in realistic fiction, so they're super imperfect, and their story to some extent, you know, you have to as an author resolve some, but they're still human, there's still loose ends. How did you know your book was finished? What then, like, how did you tie up loose ends, revision and editing? When did you invite someone outside of yourself to come in and help with that step?
Yeah. So I wrote a first draft in about 6 months and it was really bad. But I also knew somehow, maybe from having just come off of an experience of writing a novel that took 4 years, I also knew that there was a lot to work with there. So I think after 6 months, I shared it with a couple friends who then kind of redirected certain parts. And also there were parts where they said, I don't think those teens would do that, Jackie. Like, I think that's maybe what you would do, but I don't think that in that moment that's what they would do. And so I went back and wrote another draft. And at some point I brought in some beta readers who were closer to teen age, and got some feedback from them. And then I actually hired someone at the Loft in Minneapolis to help me with kind of large scale revisions and then smaller scale revisions. This sounds like so much. And then I went out to California for a writing workshop for writers of children's and young adult literature, and got some really great help and feedback there from some professionals. And I think at that point I just felt like, okay, this is as far as I can take it with the resources that I have. And honestly, now I don't have, if I was where I'm at right now in life, I would not be able to afford some of the things that I was able to afford at that point. So for different people, your resources are going to run out at different points, right? But I think for me, I had used all the resources that were available to me and had gotten it as good as I could with the resources that I had available. And I knew, okay, now it's, this has to be the next step, right? And then, you know, when I worked with my editor, she helped me take it further than that because she was a new resource, right? And then now with this book that is on submission, I can see the light coming in and like giving me kind of a fun, like, anyway, my agent has helped with that too. So after like when I kind of feel like I've taken it as far as I can, then I'll send it to my agent. He'll give me some ideas and revisions. I'll send it back to him. Then he kind of when out his and my resources are exhausted, then it feels like it's the right timing. So I think, I think it's just a matter of taking it as far as you're able to with the resources that are available to you, which are going to be different for different people.
Yeah. So that's a really interesting perspective as well, because so you've chosen to go the traditional publishing route. You've got an agent, and you're an expert in query letter writing, which because I know this because I've attended your workshops. And so what was your thought process that went into making these decisions for your author career? Like, why traditional publishing? So I'm hearing you say that's a great decision for you where you're at now because of the layers of support that you have. But can you talk through some of that thought process about why you went this route?
I think that, so growing up, so I'm a child of the 80s and the 90s. So that idea, how now you can on Kindle, you can publish this afternoon, right?
Yep.
We didn't grow up, I shouldn't say that. I didn't grow up with that, right? Yeah. I grew up with books that you bought at a store or you picked up from a library and you held in your hand. So I think part of that is probably just from the time when I was growing up, like publishing, that is what publishing was at that time. Now publishing has taken on a lot of different things, but for me, I grew up with this idea of traditional publishing. And I think that influenced me to be like, yeah, that's what I want to do. Whereas I think people who are growing up right now, they're growing up in a world where they're like, oh, is that an ebook? Oh, is that on Kindle? Oh, did you buy that online? It's just a very different world. So I don't know that it was necessarily like a really like in-depth like thought process for me. I think it felt very natural because I had grown up in a time where books were mostly traditionally published. I do like the idea of I like the idea of an agent and an editor helping make it better than you can make it on your own. And I like the distribution of a publisher versus, like they can get you into stores versus just like buy this from my website or from Amazon or, or whatever that looks like. So I think some of it was just very like natural, like not a lot of thought put into it. And I think there's also, if you publish yourself, you are also the marketer and potentially the cover designer and public relations, sales, everything falls on you. And that works out really, really great for some people who are like super motivated. And honestly, even if you publish traditionally, that does not mean that you don't have to participate in those things. Publishers don't necessarily have the budget to be like, oh, we're going to send you on like a 16 city book tour. Like it's still going to, in a large part, those things a lot will still fall to you. But there's a team. It's just a little bit different instead of being, I get to be the writer on a team instead of the whole team.
Sure. So in this idea of persevering and going through the multiple books that you've been working on, how are you maintaining a sustainable like longevity of your author career and healthy perspective when this waiting time, you said your current manuscript is out in submissions, your agent is waiting to hear back from different publishers, like that feels to me like difficult, waiting, not knowing, and kind of like an obstacle. So how are you how are you keeping going? How are you persevering in that?
I was always told immediately start working on your next project. Partly as a distraction. Like they told me that the writing world, the writing community, they said, even when you query, they said, get your query letters out and start your next project, because otherwise you're gonna just sit there and be waiting for responses. And you still are in some ways, but you are distracting yourself and you're moving forward. You know, you're essentially like planning for whatever comes next. Either after this book gets a great home and published, I have another one on the burner, or let's say this one doesn't go anywhere, I'm working on the next one that I hope will. There's also this thought of like, let's say that this one doesn't go anywhere, I'm working on another one. Let's say this one does, I can pull this one back out, and so it's it's just interesting to be like, always kind of have a project to keep moving forward. And that doesn't mean don't take breaks. I mean, it just kind of means to keep looking forward and to keep moving forward, even, and sometimes especially in those waiting seasons, or you'll become consumed with that part when you could be using that energy to put into a new piece of art.
Yeah, I think that's really neat, and it puts the responsibility on you, so it allows you to actually be in control of what you can be in control of. And so your job as an author is to write the stories.
Yep. Now that I'm agented, when I hand it over to my agent, now I've done everything I could, and now it's his job, but I still have a job, which is to write another story.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's so true as well. I have a few different pieces that I'm working on that are at different stages, and it's really helpful to know that I can spend time in the creation phase part of my brain with this piece. I can spend some time in the marketing phase of this piece, and then some time in I haven't been spending time in the massive rewrite phase because it's a bit intense but it's really nice even to kind of just move things along at the pace when it feels right for you. And I think if you hand something off, then you're bereft without, what do I do now? And if that's part of who you are, you're a writer, you're an author. So if you aren't writing and authoring, that's not you being yourself.
No, I mean, exactly that. And also just that fact of like, are we finding joy only in publishing, or are we finding joy in all the other parts? And not always will we find joy in all the other parts, but that's the goal, right? Is to be like, I love this writing life, not just I love the day my book came out.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It just made me think of so I have this character that's a real person to me. He's my friend, and for years, like I met him in a writing class, and for years I've just enjoyed writing him and like getting to know him. And then over the last few months, I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but he started popping up in like random free writing sessions. And then my last NaNoWriMo, he's the neighbor of my main character. And I was like, I'm so sorry that I have been neglecting you.
I love it.
And so I think that's so interesting. I just loved his stories. I never thought that I would need to publish them, but now it feels like he's ready to meet the world.
I love that. And that's the thing too, like, and what I'm about to say is going to sound really privileged, actually. Um, but because I have published a book and written on deadlines, I I can really see how lovely it is to not have those same deadlines and to be able to just do something because you love it, not because, this has to be done by Tuesday.
Yeah.
And again, there's people who would hear someone say that and be like, yeah, I'll trade with you, right? But like right now, I'm not writing on deadline. Like I have a manuscript with publishers, and if they give me a book deal, I will have to go back to that.
Yeah.
But right now, I'm working on another manuscript, and there's no deadline outside of what I give to myself, and no pressure outside of what I give to myself. And so, can I enjoy this season? Because this is this is actually like this is supposed to be the part that's great, the writing without all of the stress, right? So I'm trying to really love this season, knowing that, or hoping that, I will maybe have to re-enter a writing with stress season if I have another book deal.
Yeah. Let's talk about anxiety a little bit more and its role with like overcoming obstacles, being able to persevere. So you work with teenagers, right?
Yeah, yes.
So how have you found ways to encourage and motivate them when they're like anxiously trying to decide what college to go to, what majors to choose, what career, like how do you help them keep going and live authentically to be able to truly make the impact on the world that they are longing to make? How, like,
Yeah.
what advice what do you give them?
So my day job is working as an admission counselor, recruiter for a private school, private college and university. And so while I do work with the college students who attend here, my role works specifically with high school juniors and seniors who are considering attending here. And like you were saying, walking them through the process, helping them through choosing a major and where do I want to go to school, and all of the anxiety that comes from being 16, 17, 18 and having to make really big, intense decisions that sometimes really impact you financially. And in a world where the question seems to imply, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? When adults actually, for the most part, we know that's not exactly what you're doing in college. You are developing your personhood into who you may be for the rest of your life, but choosing to be a music major does not mean that you cannot go outside of the boundaries of a career in music for the rest of your life. And I think that we adults need to be a lot more clear about that, because I think that is how a lot of the students I work with are feeling. Like, how am I supposed to know what I want to do when I'm 40, when I'm 17? And that's not really what this is about. It's, what do you want to do while you're in college that will set you up for something you might want to do in the future? But it also might not be. Like, college is a time where you're learning so many life skills, critical thinking skills, interpersonal skills, which are going to like follow you even if you don't eventually get a job in the field that you studied. And I think that students just need to hear that so much more often, and even just hear the stories from like the adults in their life, oh, I studied history and now I like own this business, or like I studied art but I like am now like a podcaster. I mean, we go all of these different ways. And so I think that there is a lot of anxiety with teens around these ideas of what am I going to do with the rest of my life, when really it's what's your next step, right? What's the next step that you want to take? And I think over my career of working as a college recruiter, I've really learned to trust my intuition a lot more, and I've become very open about my own experiences, which what that means is that when I'm with a student, I'm really much trying to listen to what they're saying and what they're not saying. So not only like what is being verbally expressed, but also what is possibly like behind what they're saying. And then sometimes what that means is then I will bring up an experience where I was in that boat. And it's very interesting how often they'll go, yeah, okay, that's what's really behind this. Like, for example, I had a student contact me and say, am I able to, I'm taking an online college class right now. She was a senior in high school, but taking a college like dual enrollment online class. Am I able to retake that next year as a student? And so if you're only listening to what she said, your answer might be, sure, you can retake that class. What I said to her was, I'm a recovering perfectionist, and I can picture myself being in your shoes my senior year and getting like a B or a B plus on it and thinking, I need to retake this and get an A. And she said, yeah, that's where I'm at. I'm getting a B plus in this. And I said, I don't think you should retake it. I said, I think that the earlier that you learn that it's okay to not be perfect and that you can accept grace is going to make you a healthier person. And she was like, that's really interesting. Like, I'll think about that. Maybe I need to just take like a B plus in this class and go about my business knowing, boy, B plus is actually not a bad grade. But I could hear or I could guess from the words that she wasn't saying that there was maybe something behind this. So it wasn't just as easy as, yeah, you can retake that class if you need to. It was, let's talk a little bit about why you maybe should or shouldn't retake class that you're actually doing quite well in. And so I try to do that with my students, is hear the fear or the anxiety or the root behind some of the things that are expressed, and then to kind of be direct in asking, is this actually about this instead of this other thing? Or being direct by saying, when I was your age, I would have thought blah, 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 and see if the light goes on, you know, and they're like, yeah, that's what is happening here. So I think that that's sort of how I'm trying to interact with the teens in my life, in my day job, which of course impacts my writing for teens.
Absolutely. Cool. So what is next for Jackie Lea Sommers?
I guess we'll see. I guess we'll see what happens with this manuscript that's out on submission. I love it. I think it is such a special story. I'm really proud of the writing in it. I like the characters. So I'm actually in a spot of, which is kind of unusual for me. I usually have a lot of imposter syndrome, where I think I'm a fraud. I'm not actually good at this. I'm kind of in a spot where I feel like even if this doesn't get a book deal, I'm very proud of it. I think that it's really good. And I'm hopeful that even if it doesn't get a book deal right now, that maybe later in my career, it could come back around, because I just think it's very special. So we'll see what happens with that. I'm working on another story about teenagers in Duluth, Minnesota.
My hometown.
Yeah, and I'm trying to decide how much or little to say. This girl has a sister who was born they were both born via in vitro fertilization. So technically, they are twins, but they are 2 years apart because one egg was implanted and they had this kid and then they did it later. The parents are kind of musical prodigies, and so is the younger sister. And so the older sister really kind of battles like, was I the broken version? Like I was like the baby that didn't meet your expectations. So you had my sister who meets your expectations. And there's all of these intense feelings in that because her sister is one of her best friends and favorite people, but she also has this tremendous like envy and almost like anger and really feelings of being less than with like her favorite person. So that's kind of what I'm working on right now. And then I've got a manuscript that is just kind of hanging out. It's probably on its like third or fourth draft. It's like a full story. And I just need to let it sit for a while. And then I want to write a middle grade story. And I also am interested in maybe writing some sort of book of essays. So we'll see.
Sounds really exciting. I love it.
Thanks, Molly. I'm excited too.
So what would you say, like 3 to 5, just like top tips for people who want to get their words out and make a positive impact on the world?
Show up. And by that, I mean, you have to write, and it's okay if you write like really bad first drafts, but you have to get something on paper. You have to kill the butterfly, unfortunately, because the idea unshared is not as valuable as the idea on paper in existence and shareable in general. To give yourself a break and to play and have fun, like to let the characters do crazy things. You can take it out if it doesn't fit. I think that there's a lot of times people plan and plot to death, right? Like where it's okay for you to just like play with a scene. Like there's a scene in Truest that I just kind of wrote as this sort of like funny whim based off of a song that I heard, and it ended up going in the story, right? And now that's not always true, but like it was really fun to write and it ended up fitting. So like let yourself play and let really crazy things happen. Let bad things happen to your characters and let them make mistakes. You have to have conflict in your story, and you have to have stakes, right? If it's just all happy, nothing really happens, that's not a novel. That's not the narrative arc. And then to not give up, to show up and keep showing up. If you sit down day after day after day and write even a tiny bit, that's how a book gets written. Like it gets written by showing up over and over and over and making bad sentences, and then showing up over and over and making them into better sentences. So yeah, it really, I think, is all about persevering and showing up. And then also, if you feel really called to it, like allow yourself to have some failures. It's very interesting to me that someone could, I want to say this a little bit differently. If you really feel called to writing and you write a book and it doesn't go anywhere, it doesn't get published, that doesn't mean you're a fraud. That means that was part of your practice. And I just think there's so many other areas where we don't expect that of people. We don't expect that a musician will sit down and play something perfectly the first time. Or even like to take it even, make it even more connected, like a musical composer. We don't expect that their work at age 16 is going to be the same as it is when they're 30 or 40 or 50. Like it's life is like a learning and growing process. So I do think that for people who are perfectionists or recovering perfectionists, there's this drive to be like, have it be perfect. But then where are you going to go from there? If you wrote a perfect book at age 18, now what? Like, so if you can think more about your career and even your life in this like longer arc of like, I love Truest. I feel really proud of it. I really like the characters, but I hope that when I'm 50 or 60, I'm writing books that I think are better than that one. Because I hope to look back and think, yeah, that's my first book that I wrote like when I was in my early 30s. And I love it, and it set my career like on a certain path, but I'm really excited about the growth I've experienced since then, because that's the whole point, right? Is that we continue to make hopefully better and better art. So you have to start somewhere.
That's great. Awesome. So how can readers keep in touch to know when your next projects are released, and where
Yeah.
can we find your book to purchase, Truest?
Yeah, my book is available on most websites. Like if you went to like Barnes and Noble or Amazon, even better if you went to like an indie bookstore or IndieWire. You can even ask them to like order it if you went to an indie bookstore and they didn't have it there. I am on Instagram is kind of where I live a little bit. So it's Jackie Lea Sommers, Lee with an A, Lea, and Sommers with an O, S-O. And that's where I talk about faith and writing and life and mental illness and physical illness and goals and trying to become the woman that I would love to be.
Well, Jackie Lea Sommers, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you.
Thanks, Molly. I really appreciate it.